10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so this is Monday afternoon? Second part 2, September 1st, 2014, part 2. Okay, so now we've gone through the 4 types of karma by way of the order of ripening. Now we come to 4 types of karma by way of time of ripening. And so the distinction here is between what is called immediately effective karma, then subsequently effective karma, indefinitely effective karma, and then the 4th is defunct karma. 3 of these are taken directly and explicitly from the sutta. There are a few suttas in which the Buddha says that a particular karma that's created can ripen in any of 3 ways, either in this present life, in the next life, that is upon rebirth, or at some subsequent time. So what is called immediately effective karma, in Pali it's Abhidhamma Vedaniya, which means karma that is to be felt or experienced in this present state itself. This is karma, I'm reading from the guide, is karma which, if it is to ripen, must yield its result in the same existence in which it is performed. Otherwise, if it doesn't get the opportunity to ripen in this life, then it becomes defunct. It doesn't have the chance to ripen. Okay, now this is something which is said here. It says, according to the Abhidhamma, I think this is said in the Abhidhamma commentaries, not in the Abhidhamma Pitaka itself. It says that, in the javana process we have 7 javanas. So it's said that of the 7 javanas in the javana process, the first javana, which is the weakest of all, becomes the immediately effective karma. That is the karma which will ripen in this life. Then it's said that the last javana moment, the 7th javana moment, becomes the karma which will ripen in the next existence, because it's the second weakest, whereas the middle 5 javanas are stronger than the first and the last. So those generate the karma which can ripen in any existence after the next one. That's what is said in the Abhidhamma commentaries. I have to say that this seems to me a little bit too neat to be completely convincing. It seems to me that a whole javana process should be either karma to be ripening in this present life, Maybe the weakest jhana process will ripen in this present life or not at all. The next weakest jhana process will ripen in the form of rebirth, and the strongest jhana process, but it seems that the strongest jhana process should also generate rebirth, right? Maybe it's just so the workings of the different jhana processes are maybe just so complex that we can't fix one single law to say this one is going to ripen in this life, this one will ripen in the next life, this one will ripen in any future life. Maybe it depends more on the nature of the karma or the force of the volition that goes into it than the particular position of that jhana process. Anyway, so then the second, by way of this, in terms of the time of ripening, what comes second is called the subsequently effective karma. In Pali, this is upapajja vedaniya, which means karma that is to be felt or experienced upon rebirth, having been reborn. And this is karma, said to be karma which, if it is to ripen, must yield its result in the existence immediately following that in which it is performed. Otherwise, it becomes defunct. So if this karma doesn't get the opportunity to ripen in the next existence, then it loses its potency and won't ripen at all. And then, as I said before, according to the Abhidhamma commentaries, this type of karma is generated by the last jhana moment in a jhana process, which is the second weakest in the series. Then the indefinitely effective karma, in Pali this is uppara pariya vedaniya karma, which means karma which is to be felt or to experienced at some time or another. So this is karma which can ripen at any time from the second future existence onward, whenever it gains the opportunity to produce results. So the commentaries say that this karma is generated by the 5 middle jhanas in a 7 jhana process. And this karma never becomes defunct so long as the round of rebirths continue. So not even the Buddha himself is exempt from experiencing the results of indefinitely effective karma. So it's said in some of the stories that come, I think even in the Pali Canon, that the Buddha had a disposition towards a chronic backache, or sometimes he would get a headache, and that this is a result of some karma generated long ago in an earlier life. I think he was working as an assistant to a fisherman. And so when the fisherman would catch the fish and bring them up onto the land, his job was to take the fish and to hit the head against the ground in order to kill it. And so as a result of that, even he created some unwholesome karma which would ripen in his last life by occasionally getting a headache or a backache. And then also the Buddha, if you know the story of the attack by Devadatta, Devadatta tried to assassinate the Buddha by pushing a boulder when the Buddha was outside. He was on Vulture's Peak Mountain, outside a cave, walking back and forth, doing walking meditation. And Devadatta went on top of another mountain, and he wanted to kill the Buddha, thinking, if I get rid of the Buddha, I become the Buddha. He thought he could become the head of the Sangha. And so he pushed a boulder down so that the boulder would come rolling down the mountain, and while the Buddha was walking back and forth, it would hit the Buddha and crush him against the side of the mountain and kill him. But what happened, because of the Buddha's good karma, I guess, just by chance, some other stone was dislodged from the mountain and came rolling down, and it collided with the boulder that Devadatta had unleashed. And so it blocked that boulder from striking the Buddha and killing him, but a splinter of stone broke off from the original boulder and struck the Buddha on his leg and injured him and caused the Buddha to bleed. And so in that case, the Buddha was probably experiencing the result of some unwholesome karma from the past. Okay, then defunct karma, the concept of defunct karma is introduced, explicitly introduced, in one of the later works of the Pali Canon called Patisambhidamagga. And this is said to be, it doesn't designate a special class of karma distinct from the others, but it applies to karma that was due to ripen in either the present existence or in the next existence, but did not meet with conditions conducive to its maturation. So this is, for example, like seeds. If we have a bunch of seeds and we could plant them in the ground, and some seeds will get the opportunity, they get planted or strewn on top of good soil, and they get sufficient rain, water, and so they ripen and they bring forth plants. But other seeds, maybe when we scatter them, they get on top of a rock, and then they get dried up by the heat of the sun, or else some birds come and eat the seeds, or insects nibble the seeds. And so then the seeds are destroyed and they can't bring forth any plants. And then in the case of the Arahants, the Buddha and the Arahats, then all of their accumulated karma from the beginningless past that might have had the opportunity to ripen in future lives becomes defunct when they pass away into nirvana. Okay, then we have the next subject of inquiry is the place of ripening. And so it said, with respect to the place in which the effect takes place, there are 4 kinds of karma, namely unwholesome karma, wholesome karma pertaining to the sense sphere, wholesome karma pertaining to the fine material sphere, and wholesome karma pertaining to the immaterial or formless sphere. And now we're going to see what are the actual unwholesome karmas and the wholesome karmas that ripen in these different spheres. And so we start with the unwholesome karma. And so the unwholesome karma always pertains to the sense sphere. You know, there's no such thing as unwholesome karma pertaining to the fine material or immaterial sphere. So unwholesome karma is threefold according to the doors of action. So we have 3, we call these the 3 doors of action, means or channels through which we perform karma. That's body, speech, and mind. In a sense, all karma is produced by the mind because, as I said earlier, it's the volition that generates the karma. But in the case of bodily action bodily karma, the volition activates the body so that we perform an act through the body. In the case of verbal karma, the volition activates speech so that one performs a verbal deed. And in the case of mental karma, this is karma which occurs only as thoughts or emotions in the mind, but doesn't get the opportunity to express itself through either bodily action or verbal action. And then, again, this is drawing from the suttas. The suttas enumerate again and again what are called the 10 courses of unwholesome karma. And these 10 courses are distinguished according to the 3 doors of karma. And so we have, under the heading of bodily actions, the unwholesome karmas are killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So these are called bodily actions because they generally occur through the door of the body, which is known as bodily intimation or bodily manifestation, bodily expression. Why does it say generally occurring rather than always occurring? Okay, I'm the head of a gang, a criminal gang based in the great city of Chicago back in the 1920s. Al Capone, or who was the other one? Bugs Malone, was that his name? Bugsy? I think that there was a Bugs Malone at some point. Somebody said Rupert Murdoch? Anyway, Al Capone never touched a gun in his life, but he doesn't like this rival gang, so he says to his men, you know, it would be really wonderful if they weren't intruding upon our business. Get the message, guys? Then the next day, the newspaper heading is Massacre on St. Valentine's Day. Okay, so Al Capone doesn't press the trigger, doesn't kill anybody, seemingly, but he's giving the verbal instructions to kill. So through the verbal instruction, this is still a bodily karma, even though it's his henchmen that do the dirty work. But when he gives the instruction, whether it's indirect through a hint or through direct command, it's still considered a bodily action. Similarly with stealing, or if I'm the head of a gang of thieves, so I don't have to go to the bank and hold up the bank. I just sit in the hangout and I just send my men out there to the bank and they do the dirty work of robbing the bank. But when they bring back the money, I get 3/5 and the other 10 guys get to divide the 2/5 amongst them. So because I'm giving the instructions to steal, I'm still committing the bodily deed of stealing. In regard to sexual misconduct, I think that has to be, to my knowledge, it has to be done by oneself. Okay, then we come, so those are the 3 types of bodily misconduct. Then we come to 4 types of verbal misconduct. This is false speech, telling a deliberate lie. Then pisunavacha, here it's translated slandering, but actually a better rendering would be divisive speech. This is speech which is intended to create division between people who are living together harmoniously. So by bad reports about one to the other, one creates a division between them. The third is harsh speech, and then the fourth is frivolous chatter, idle chatter, or gossip. And so these are verbal actions generally occurring through the door of speech, known as vocal or verbal intimation. And so it's said to be generally occurring through the door of speech because it also can occur through writing or through hand signs, I guess. So if somebody can't speak, but they give verbal, hand signs to indicating, deliberately giving false information or creating division between people, it's still unwholesome speech. And people write deliberate, like newspaper reports, somebody gives false information, or gossip columnists spread bad reports about people to create division between them. It's also considered unwholesome verbal action. And then the types of purely mental action are covetousness, ill will, and wrong view. Now, to constitute a unwholesome course of karma, covetousness and ill will are somewhat stronger than ordinary greed and anger. Covetousness here means, like, if I see somebody has something nice and I wish that I had it, somebody gets a nice car and I see it, I wish I had a car like that. That is a kind of covetousness, but it's not an unwholesome course of karma. It becomes an unwholesome course of karma when I see somebody has something nice and I think, how can I get possession of that for myself? So one wants to deprive somebody of what is rightfully theirs, but one doesn't take any action to bring that desire to pass. So desiring to get possession of the rightful possessions of others, that is the unwholesome course of karma. And similarly, just being angry with another person doesn't constitute the course of karma, but the anger becomes a course of karma when one thinks, I wish harm and suffering will come to that person. Of course, when one has greed for the possessions of others, when one gets angry at others, that is creating unwholesome karma. But there's a distinction between simple karma and the course of karma. Simple karma is just karma with the potential to ripen in some way. If it's unwholesome karma, karma with the potential to ripen in some type of suffering. But the unwholesome course of karma is karma which is strong enough to take on the role of generating rebirth. Okay, so we have covetousness, ill will, and wrong view, the specific kind of wrong view which the Buddhist texts single out as the unwholesome course of karma is the wrong view which denies the value of doing good and wholesome deeds, and which holds that there's no real distinction between good and bad, virtue and non-virtue, the wholesome actions or unwholesome actions. So it's the kind of view that we can say undermines the foundations of morality. Now, I think there's a difference between the way we would interpret this today and the way it would have been interpreted in the time of the Buddha. Now you see, in the Buddha's time, it was taken almost as axiomatic, as normal and natural for people of good faith to affirm, or of people of a good nature to affirm the reality of rebirth and the operation of karma, so that they would hold that good and bad actions produce their results in some life after the present one. And so if somebody denied that in the Buddha's time and said that there's no results of good and bad deeds, it would really sort of send tremors through the minds of those who would hear about it. It would be like they're just knocking the very foundations of morality. But today, there are like many people who are sort of brought up with a scientific education and background, who don't believe in any continuation of consciousness, personal identity beyond the present life, don't believe in anything like karma operating from this life to future lives, but still they hold to standards of morality, of ethics. They recognize that there is a distinction between good and bad behavior, and that we should avoid unethical actions and we should behave morally. So I don't think people who hold to that view that there are real moral distinctions and that we should avoid unethical behavior and behave ethically, I don't think that they would fall into the category of wrong view like this. Okay, so these are the unwholesome types of karma. The next section, the unwholesome types of karma are distributed according to the roots. I'll pass over that and come to the wholesome karma of the sense sphere. Okay, now the wholesome karma of the sense sphere is also threefold according to the door of action, namely bodily action pertaining to the door of body, and verbal action pertaining to the door of speech, and mental action pertaining to the door of the mind. And one way to understand the wholesome behavior of the sense sphere is simply as the opposite of the 10 unwholesome courses of action. So in this case, the way it's described in the text, we have 3 types of wholesome behavior by way of body. That is, somebody abstains from the destruction of life, from killing living beings. Somebody abstains from stealing. Somebody abstains from sexual misconduct. Now these actions, it doesn't mean that one is actually doing something positive with the body, but the very fact simply that one is abstaining through one's own determination, one makes the resolve, the determination, I will refrain from the destruction of life, I'll refrain from stealing, I'll refrain from sexual misconduct. Through that determination, it's counting as bodily wholesome karma. Similarly with speech, somebody makes the determination, I will refrain from false speech, refrain from divisive speech, refrain from harsh speech, refrain from idle chatter or gossip. That determination constitutes wholesome karma of speech, or wholesome verbal karma. And then, of course, in the mind, somebody doesn't give way to covetousness or miserliness, but generates a mind of generosity, doesn't give rise to volitions or intentions of ill will, but instead generates thoughts of goodwill or loving kindness, and somebody doesn't hold to the wrong view, but generates or adopts the right view, that there is a valid distinction between good and bad actions, wholesome karma and unwholesome karma, and that these actions do produce results either in this life or in future lives. So this will be the right view that constitutes a wholesome course of karma. So that's one way to understand the wholesome karma of the sense sphere, the kind of minimum wholesome karma, which is called the 10 wholesome courses of action. And even these determinations to follow the 10 courses of wholesome action are strong enough to take on the role of generating the rebirth. But the suttas also mention 3 types of meritorious karma. So these 3 types of meritorious karma are giving or generosity, virtue or virtuous behavior, which would be, for example, observing the 5 precepts, or even going further and trying to observe all of the 10 wholesome courses of action. And then meditation or bhavana, which literally means, the word bhavana literally means development or cultivation. So that is the inner attempt to cultivate wholesome states of mind. And these are said to be 8-fold according to the classes of consciousness. That is what's responsible for giving, observing precepts, and the early stages of meditative development are the 8 wholesome sense sphere states of consciousness. So those 3 are called, in the suttas, they're called the punya kirya vattu, the bases of meritorious activity. Then the commentaries analyze or elaborate on these 3 basic types of meritorious activity, maybe because they like to have a 10-fold set. So then we get 10 ways of creating merit. So the first 3 are the same: giving, virtuous behavior, and meditation. Then comes reverence, respect, or veneration, particularly like the veneration for the Buddhas towards the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Then service to others, being helpful to others, doing deeds that are beneficial to others. Then the sharing of merit. So whenever we do meritorious deeds, then we make the mental effort to share these merits with others. So with our minds, we invite other beings to rejoice in our meritorious deeds, and thereby, if they rejoice, they get the merit as well. So I know in some of the Buddhist countries, when somebody does some meritorious deed at the Buddhist temple, there's usually like a gong that they strike. So they strike the gong, and then when people, say in the countryside, hear the gong being struck, then they know that somebody has done some meritorious deed. Then they make the effort to rejoice in that meritorious deed, so they have the chance to share in the merit. So here also we have the bell and the drum, so that's supposed to be signaling that meritorious deeds have been done in the monastery through the day, and that those who hear the drum and the bell, they can rejoice. These beings in other realms of existence, they can rejoice, and then they share in the merits. So that's sharing of the merit, and then I've already covered the next one, which is rejoicing in others' merit. So even if we don't see or hear of others doing meritorious deeds, one could just think that, like, throughout this world there are many beings who are doing meritorious deeds. Let me rejoice in it. We could think of all of the other realms of existence where beings are doing meritorious deeds and rejoice in those deeds of merit. Okay, then listening to the Dharma is a meritorious deed. Teaching the Dharma and then straightening out one's views. This is done by studying the Dharma on one's own, reflecting on the Dharma, asking questions, developing insight to try to arrive at right view. So all of these activities are attempts to straighten out one's views, to clarify one's understanding of the Dharma. So these are all wholesome karma of the sense sphere. Then we come to wholesome karma of the fine material sphere. So wholesome karma of the fine material sphere is purely mental karma. So it's not bodily or verbal, because this karma consists in the meditation that has reached the samadhi, or meditative absorption, and this is fivefold by distinction of the five jhanas. So when a meditator achieves the first, second, third, fourth, fifth jhana, that abiding in the jhana creates wholesome karma, which has the tendency to bring rebirth into the fine material realm. And then we come to the wholesome karma of the immaterial sphere, and this consists in the meditation that has reached absorption, and this is distinguished according to the four immaterial meditative attainments. So this would be the attainment of the base of infinite space and so on. So that is creating the wholesome karma that will bring its results in the form of rebirth in the realm of infinite space, consciousness, nothingness, sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, at this point, we have some time, so I could ask whether there's any questions, anything that needs to be cleared up here. Okay, Riza, Mr. Wait, first Riza, then. Please, yeah.
So for karma generated in this lifetime, where is it stored?
Okay, this is an interesting question. Where is the karma stored? And from the perspective of the schools of early Buddhism, and even the schools of Mahayana Buddhism, except for the Yogacara school, they say that there's no place where the karma is stored, but it's just that when the karma is done, we could say metaphorically it's stored, but what this means is that there is a potential for that karma to ripen. And so they would say that the karma creates a condition to ripen and produce its results, but to think of the karma being stored someplace involves, maybe we call this the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. That is, picturing karma as some kind of physical entity that has to be stored someplace. But some of the later Buddhist philosophers found this problematic, and so the school called the Yogacara school then developed the idea of, it's called the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which they take to be a kind of deep consciousness underlying all of the active types of consciousness, in which karma is seen as depositing seeds that are stored in the alaya vijnana, and then when they get the chance, when they meet with the conditions, then those seeds in the alaya vijnana ripen and bring their results. But the early schools recognize just 6 types of consciousness without accepting the alaya, and they just hold that when karma is done, there is that potential there, but the potential is not situated any place physically. It's just that, I don't know how to illustrate this. Okay, let me, I'm not sure if this will work or not. But according to the Yogacara school, it's like when we are creating a document, we then save it onto our hard disk. And so then when we want to call up that document again at some time in the future, then we go to our hard disk where we have all of our files stored, and we open that document and it appears. But somebody else is using, he doesn't want to be bothered with a hard drive, so he's saving all of his files on the, now they call it the Sky Drive. What is this? Cloud Drive, yeah. So this is like being saved on the cloud. It doesn't quite work because the cloud is also, there's also a physical facility where the electrons of the file are being stored. But you just have to imagine that it's not a physical facility, but somehow the electrons are being stored psychically someplace in cyberspace. And so when the person wants to open that document again and work on it further, then he just goes to his cloud drive or his Sky Drive, and now they also call it the OneDrive, I think, and open it, and then the file appears. Okay. Yeah. Oh, first, Mr. Yeah, and then Ying.
I have a very short question.
Please take the microphone.
In one of the 5 precepts, drinking, intoxication by drinking is also elaborated, but whereas in the mentioning of unwholesome karma, it was not categorized anywhere. I mean, vividly, of course, it may fall into the 3rd category, which I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the question. Okay, so this is my own interpretation of it. I haven't seen this point actually addressed satisfactorily in any other text. So, the 10 courses of unwholesome action are really strong and decisive courses of action in themselves. Now, drinking intoxicants in itself is not a decisively strong unwholesome action, but the Buddha includes it in the 5 precepts because when people drink regularly, it sort of weakens their sense of conscience, and so they become disposed to commit one or another of the 4 heavier types of unwholesome action: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, or lying. And so as a practical device, from the standpoint of maintaining like social harmony and well-being in society, the Buddha includes abstaining from intoxicants within the 5 precepts. But in terms of what actually creates unwholesome karma in itself strong enough to generate a rebirth, the use of intoxicants, if it doesn't lead to violation of the other precepts, is not strong enough to do that. Okay, I said Ying and, well, we're getting to the break time. Ying and Paul, and then I have to say, write your questions down or remember them, and we'll take them in the evening.
Bente, my question is sort of related to that gentleman's question.
Yeah.
So, who or what bears the karma, whatever is wholesome or unwholesome?
who or what bears the karma?
Yeah, it's not I. It's
Okay. Okay. It depends on the point of view from which one is speaking. When one is speaking from the point of view of, this would be like a technical, from a technical or doctrinal point of view, one would say it's the stream of consciousness that bears the karma, and that the karma will produce its results in that same stream of consciousness.
I agree. Yeah.
And then when we're speaking from what's called the conventional or ordinary point of view, we say it's the person who created the karma that bears that karma. So the Buddha will say, you know, if somebody is undergoing some misfortune in the present life, say Moggallana was assassinated, after that the monks came to the Buddha and said, how could it be that Moggallana was assassinated? Then the Buddha will explain, well, in a distant past life, Moggallana had killed his parents. So of course, there isn't a self or a substantial person or an Atman going on through all of these lives with the same identity. But from the conventional point of view, we would say that this stream of consciousness that has now taken form as Moggallana is part of the same stream of consciousness that was in that being long ago who killed his parents. So conventionally we say it's the person.
Right, precisely. I agree. But sometimes some people just got confused.
Yeah, well, this is the way.
Thank you.
I think we've come to the end point. So you write your question down or bring it up in the evening. I'll give you first opportunity in the evening. Okay, so we could end with 3.